My most vivid memory of the late 90s was the Clinton Lewinsky scandal. Not because of the scandal itself, but because of the coverage of it. I remember my parents were pissed off at Clinton and kept calling him the deadbeat president. I couldn't watch any TV because they had the news running non-stop. We lived in Maryland, and my dad knew somebody who knew President Clinton personally. So they were getting details about what was going on behind the scenes. To clarify, my dad worked for the Department of Defense at the time, and Clinton being removed from office would have resulted in some kind of power shift, and his direct superior being promoted. What did I care? I was just a kid. I just wanted to watch Rocko's Modern Life. I remember my parents inviting over about 10 people, and while they had loud conversations downstairs as the TV was playing, I was up in my room, being a bitter kid. My parents wouldn't let me take the smaller black and white TV out of the closet. They couldn't get it to tune into the channel I wanted to watch anyway. I was sitting in my bed, listening to one of my cassette tapes, trying to drown out the annoying, serious adult conversation taking place downstairs. When I happened to glance out the window, down in the backyard, I saw a man I didn't recognize move across the yard quickly in the dark, avoiding the patches of light cast by the downstairs windows. I got out of bed and looked out my window at him. I remember that he was bald and very tall, taller than my dad. But I figured that he was just one of the guests that were visiting. Who cares about what he was doing in our backyard? I watched him more out of boredom than anything else. The man cautiously came closer to the house, peering into the ground floor windows. I was about to go back over to my dresser and flip my cassette tape over, when the man tossed something about the size of a video cassette into the doghouse. Now, our dog Gemini had just died a few weeks before. I didn't like this strange man touching the doghouse for any reason. So like the obnoxious kid I was, I walked out onto the landing and called out to my parents below. The tone of my voice left no doubt that I was unhappy and wanted the situation resolved immediately. I remember the silence that followed lasted way longer for my liking. "What man?" my mother called back up to me. From down below, all became quiet. All I could hear was the TV. To this day, I have never seen my dad move so fast. He shot up the stairs, picked me up, and came back down. My mom and the other house guests followed. We all had to wait at the neighbor's house across the street while the police and the bomb squad came. I don't think I realized the severity of the situation until I was much older, but at the time I was more annoyed than afraid. I was asked to share everything that I saw, but the only way I could describe the man was saying that he looked like Captain Picard. I wasn't the best at descriptions. I don't remember most of what happened next. We eventually got to go back into our house. My dad died of blood poisoning in 2005, and my mom passed away of natural causes in 2007. They never told me exactly what the package was, whether it was a bomb or a threat of any kind, but it was definitely something serious. The police would come back and show me pictures of possible suspects. I don't remember ever identifying the stranger in our backyard. I live in Vermont now, and I really have no ties to the people that my parents knew, but I have a creepy story for the ages that always entertains at parties. I have a faint memory of being involved in the Rodney King riots back in 1992. I was only 7 at the time. We had originally been stacking empty beer cans in my friend's fenced-in backyard when the commotion started. We heard a lot of yelling and cursing and police sirens, even a few loud pops, which I didn't understand at the time were gunshots. We all wandered over to the chain-link fence and watched the rioters up the street. They were shouting and breaking windows, getting into fights with cops and other random pedestrians. I have no recollection as to who was babysitting us that day, but needless to say, they did a piss-poor job. My friends and I actually left the enclosed yard and wandered out into the street to get a better look at the chaos, completely oblivious to the fact that what we were watching wasn't a show and one of those stray bullets could have easily killed us. We would watch 2 people fighting from a safe distance, then something else would catch our eye, becoming more and more separated from the backyard. One of my friends witnessed a shop being looted and asked us if we wanted any candy. He was a bit older, maybe 11. He crossed the street and peered through the broken glass. apprehensive about going inside because of all the infuriated adults around breaking things. I eventually got separated from all my friends. Most of the memory is a blur. I remember at one point getting scared when I realized that I didn't recognize anything. I ran into an alley and crouched down to watch. I remember seeing a cop take a corner pretty hard and flipped a man over the hood of his patrol car. A group of other men rushed the car before the cops could get out and started banging on the windows. In the alley across from me, I saw 3 or 4 other men pouring gasoline into a dumpster and lighting it on fire. I remember finding that fascinating, seeing a fire burning in something other than a fireplace or a ring of stones. I watched the fire grow bigger and bigger, completely oblivious to the world around me. I wanted to look closer, but I was too scared about crossing the street because there were so many people running around. I remember one woman walked past me down the alley. She came up to me and kissed me on the forehead and said, "God bless you, child. Get yourself home." Before I could even respond that I didn't know where home was, she was gone. She lit a cigarette and disappeared down the alley. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe only 20 minutes, maybe longer, but the dumpster fire was still raging, and I continued watching it. The next part stands out the clearest in my mind. A man in a green and white windbreaker turned the corner into the alley, saw me, and grabbed me by the shirt collar. He reeked of smoke, sweat, and gasoline. He might have been one of the men from before who started the fire. I'm not sure. He started dragging me across the road towards the dumpster fire. He was cursing and swearing at me, and I began to panic. I suddenly became afraid that he was going to toss me into the fire, as I could see the flames coming closer and closer. I wasn't sure if that's exactly where we were heading, or if we were just going in that direction, but I squealed and kicked in protest until he put me into a headlock and cut off my air. When we got to the far side of the street, I could feel the heat of the fire on my face. Suddenly, a bigger man grabbed the man holding me and threw him against the wall and punched him in the face. I remember staggering to the ground and watching in horror as the bigger man pressed my kidnapper's face to the side of the dumpster. The man screamed louder than I knew a human could scream. I remember the briefest smell of burning meat. I then took off running down the sidewalk. After that, it's mostly just blurry. I remember tripping and falling, and another woman picking me up and telling me to go into the church and sit down. I must have sat there in the pews until someone recognized me and brought me home. I really don't remember the details. Remarkably, I was mostly unharmed, aside from a few scrape marks. One of my friends had to be rushed to the hospital after someone had thrown a TV out of a high window, and some of the glass hit him in the face when the TV hit the sidewalk, but he turned out to be okay. I don't know if that bigger man was coming to save me, or just had beef with the man who grabbed me, but I often wonder what happened to the man in the windbreaker. I wonder if that bigger guy killed him after pressing his face to the side of that scalding hot dumpster. Seeing fire calls that memory back. I could be watching a movie and see a bonfire in the background, and that scream will echo in my head. Considering what could have happened to me, I think I got off lucky. My aunt had a near-death experience back in 1996. She and a friend had gone out to the bar one Friday night determined to each find a guy to bring home. They both were single and daring at the time, and wanted to try something adventurous. Since this was the 90s, they didn't have cell phones so that they could text each other. So they both came up with visual cues to look out for. If they removed their earrings, that meant they had found a guy that they liked, and if they held their hand to the back of their neck in a casual manner, that meant, "Come save me." Before it was common to have conversations with one eye on your phone, this was how people got themselves out of awkward situations. My aunt told me how she mingled with the crowd for a bit and let a few guys buy her some drinks, before zeroing in on a man who was eyeballing her from across the bar. He gave her a wink, but didn't come over to buy her a drink. She was intrigued by his interest. She crossed the bar and went over to him. She told me that he had a biker jacket on with a gold watch that had a leather band. She remembered that detail because her boss had wore the exact same type of watch, and she used it to break the ice. They danced for a few minutes, and upon heading back to the bar, she removed her earrings, deciding that this was the guy she wanted to spend the night with. He said his name was Harrison. They got a table in the corner and she let him buy her a drink. After a while, she lost track of time. She began to feel a bit sluggish and nauseous. She decided that she had overdone it with the cocktails. She glanced around the bar but couldn't find her friend anywhere. Feeling shaky on her legs, she excused herself to the restroom, hoping that was where her friend was, but no such luck. She left the bathroom and headed straight for the door, suddenly not feeling up to having company over. She began to hail a cab when Harrison came out of the bar and asked her if she needed a ride home. She had hoped to slip away, afraid she may be sick and make a fool of herself, but she decided to risk it for the sake of getting a ride home and possibly getting his phone number. On the route home, she was feeling a bit better, and she started getting flirty with him. When they parked in her driveway, she invited him in. They went through the front door, and my aunt dropped her keys on the stairs on the way to the living room. They made out on the couch for a few minutes, but suddenly my aunt felt sick to her stomach, and she apologized and told him that he had to go. She said he was very understanding, and hoped that she would feel better soon. They made plans to meet the next Friday night at the same bar. Harrison let himself out and my aunt locked the door behind him. Feeling disappointed and gross, she went to bed but couldn't fall asleep because her head wouldn't stop spinning. Just past midnight, she heard movement from downstairs. She sat up in bed and listened closely. She knew her parents were both still out of state. She had spoken to them on the phone before she left that night. No one else had the key to her house. So for a few moments, she sat frozen, uncertain if she was hearing what she thought she was. Then the noises came again. Not soft noises, like someone trying to be stealthy. It sounded more like someone was rummaging around downstairs. My aunt locked her bedroom door and pressed her ear to the ground. She heard down below cabinets being opened and shut. She grabbed the phone from her room and called the police, and then hid in her closet. In retrospect, she laughs at the absurdity of her situation. Her phone was not wireless, so anyone who broke into her room would see the phone cord leading right to her closet. When the operator came online, my aunt started talking a mile a minute, saying that she was sure that there was someone in her house. The operator kept her on the line, and the next 15 minutes felt like 6 hours. During a pause in the conversation, my aunt heard footsteps coming up the stairs, followed by doors squeaking as someone peeked in each room. She then went dead silent as she heard someone pause outside her bedroom door. She didn't even notice the sirens outside until they were in her driveway. The following few minutes were a complete nightmare as she wondered why the cops weren't making entry into the house. The operator informed her that the police were just outside, but couldn't find any indication of a break-in. In a panic, she instructed them to break down the door. Almost immediately, there was a commotion on the stairs, and my aunt heard several voices screaming for someone to get down on the ground. After another moment, my aunt crawled out of the closet and went beside the bedroom door until a police officer knocked and told her it was okay to come out. My aunt wrapped herself in a long coat and followed the officer down the stairs and outside the front door. But before she reached it, she glanced over into the living room and saw the plastic shower curtain from her downstairs bathroom spread out across the floor, and her father's open toolbox was lying on the ground next to it, along with a couple of knives from the kitchen. She started hyperventilating, and they had to call an ambulance for her. After she recovered, the police let her look at the suspect through the squad car's tinted windows, and she recognized Harrison immediately. It turns out when he left her house, he grabbed her keys off the stairs and came back later and let himself in. The paramedics reported finding drugs in her system, and it was concluded that he had drugged her at the bar, but perhaps had used the wrong amount because it hadn't knocked her out as quickly or as deeply as he had intended. Harrison turned out to be a fake name, and what was the most strange about him, according to the police, was that he had no criminal record at all. He later died in prison from leukemia. Today, my aunt shares the story willingly every time she's asked about it. There's even a running joke in our family not to buy her plastic shower curtains.
There are some really, really messed up reasons to live in a haunted house. I, being of sound mind and body, don't know any of them, but I am superstitious as hell. So when the wife and I moved up to New Hampshire, right on the Vermont border, we were looking for a place to rent for a year or two before we bought a house. Now, for all of the New Englanders here, my wife is a native. I'm not. She's used to New England and the vast emptiness that this small area has to offer. There are places even she won't let me travel to after a certain hour because, quote unquote, that route you have to take, people don't come back from it. Of course, I'm not a native, so I have no clue about any of this. So when I would come home late after dark from work and tell her I took X route, she would kind of look at me in shock and awe at my stupidity. We found a home right on the above-mentioned border on the Vermont side. We loved it. It was a fantastic place to live, except for the basement. I could not shake the feeling of being watched and stalked like prey. So, like any reasonable adult, I said screw it and didn't go down there except for during the day. Then one night, after gaming for hours in my loft, I got hungry. I went downstairs, kissed the missus, and walked past my basement door toward my kitchen. I don't know if anyone reading this has gone hunting, but there's a moment when you sometimes experience, especially hunting predators like coyote, wolf, bear, etc. Sometimes they know that you have them in your sight. Sometimes they look toward you, not quite at you, but it feels like they are boring into your soul saying, "You've got me, make it quick." It's an eerie sensation, and sometimes you take the shot, sometimes you don't. On that night, as I was walking past that door downstairs, I saw red eyes and a humanoid figure. I froze, just stopped dead in my tracks. I gave that same look of, "You got me, make it quick." After that momentary lapse of sanity, I just scooted real quickly away from the door, grabbed a weapon, and called my wife, saying that there was someone downstairs and to call the police. There is no other entrance to the basement, and I had the door covered with my weapon from a safe position where I could easily run from the house. The cops showed up, I disarmed, they cleared it out, and they found no person, but a muddy set of footprints that started facing the stairs up, and then proceeded to walk into a hall in the back corner of the basement by the water heater. For some context, the wall in question also blocked off the area directly under my bedroom. It was a solid wall, with a small crawl space and maybe about 4 inches of clearance on the other side of it. The cops called the detectives checked it, couldn't see anyone in it, and they couldn't enter it. Photographs were taken, shoe sizes compared, my feet were too big, my wife's feet too small. We got a good contact number for the detective, and the wife and I stayed at a hotel for a couple nights. For months afterward, I would have the same thing happen. Eventually minus the cops. It actually got relatively normal. Good old Red Eyes in the basement, chilling like a villain. Wife was less enthused by my antics. Cheerfully, just about, and when I would spot Red Eyes, I would always give him a good old, "How you doing?" Of which we would still have muddy footprints, and I would just have to clean them up. So, COVID hits, the lockdowns happen, and we have an opportunity to move to a better house, one where we'd be able to work at home better. The main reason that the home was better, though, was that we had a mold issue in this house. It was in between the panes of glass in the windows, and every day we were cleaning it from the windowsills, door frames. Hell, we had to replace pieces of furniture multiple times, and we are very clean people. We notified the landlord over multiple months, and eventually a year, and after their actions were not helping at all, we decided to move. The landlord decided to get a housing inspector out there immediately after we left. The inspector came and verified that there was indeed a mold issue. I don't know if they met Red Eyes. However, they did find a metric ton of readings of high spore counts on the wall bordering the space below my old bedroom. the wall where the footprints always ended. So, since it was filled, the inspector scoops a little bit of the earth on the other side of the wall through that crawl space. It wasn't earth as in dirt. It was approximately 7 feet of mold. The landlord then immediately contacted specialists to remove all of it and notified me to offer some kind of damages for it in the form of refunded partial rent payments. All in all, it made my 2020 pretty good. Until about 3 months later. The landlord calls me and offers to send me a full refund of all rent from the time when I was living there minus what she already gave. Why? There was a corpse. The medical examiner said that it was the man who had owned the property before my landlord. He was a lineman who, after talking to surviving family members, wore a size 8 shoe. Smaller than my size 11 shoes, bigger than my wife's shoes by a mile. It was Red Eyes. It had to be. I don't know how you got there, but hell, bud. I hope you found peace. Sorry for not checking it out sooner. I did, after reading about his obituary and contacting his family, swing by his final resting place to drop off flowers, place a stone, and share a good morning like I used to. Till better times, Red Eyes. I woke up this morning to some disturbing news. My wife and I sleep in different rooms, mainly because I snore a lot and I also toss and turn due to spinal issues. It works out best for us. Lately, I've been going to bed around 4 a.m. since I'm out of a job and I prefer the quiet of the night. My wife usually gets up anywhere between 5 to 6 a.m. if the cats are bugging her to give them a little something until feed time. Don't ask me why, it's just what she does. Anyway, this morning after I woke up, she said as she walked past my room, she saw a shadow figure sitting on the corner of my bed, staring at me, and that my iPod was on. She also said she knew I was sleeping because I was snoring. Now, I usually watch something on my iPad before going to sleep, but I also keep my door mostly closed so that the light from the iPad doesn't disturb her. If she saw me, it means the door was open, as it would have been impossible otherwise. Now that part doesn't disturb me too much. We have 4 cats, and it's not out of the ordinary for them to push the door open. What I know 100% for a fact is that I had the door mostly closed, and the iPad was definitely in sleep mode. I always put my iPad in sleep mode, and then put my phone on the charger prior to going to sleep. My door creaks, so I would have heard it open if I were still up. This is disturbing to me because it isn't the first time a shadow man was spotted by my wife, and I spotted one before meeting her. Back in either 2008 or 2009, I was living in my first apartment. I had the scariest experience of my life. I woke up sleeping on my chest, which I never do, and I found my entire body was paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. Out of the corner of my left eye, I could see a shadow figure approaching me. I tried screaming, but nothing came out. I started to panic, and before I could do anything, everything went blank, and I woke up in the morning. I usually forget most of my dreams, but this event is scared into my brain. The last bit of information I want to share is something that seems odd to me, but I don't really know how to explain it. It's only happened twice in my room over the last 3 years. What I've seen is this strange, tan-colored dust that appears out of nowhere in a small area. The 2 times it happened, it wasn't in the same area, and oddly, the areas around the dust only have the typical normal dust buildup. I've checked the ceiling to see if anything came out from there, and found nothing. It's strange to me because while I'm not a clean freak, the amount of dust makes it look like it's been building up over months, which, for that, wouldn't be the case. This may have had nothing to do with anything, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I've watched documentaries on sleep paralysis and read some medical reports. I don't know if it is or isn't a medical condition, but what gets me is that people from all over the world with various beliefs have experienced the exact same thing. Always the inability to move one's body, and always a single or multiple shadow figures. When I was like 13, my mom and her boyfriend had to go to the hospital, and no one would be able to get my brother to the bus stop the next morning because they had to stay overnight. So, I got to miss school the next day to take my brother. After I made sure my brother got on the bus, I went home and cleaned and did random stuff, like a 13-year-old would do. It was around 11:45 when there was a knock on my door. Thinking it was the mailman or a neighbor or something, I opened the door and said hello. There was this kid. He couldn't have been much older than me at the time, but he had bangs that were covering his eyes, which I found weird because it was like 107 degrees out. So this kid was super still. Like, I thought that one of my friends put a mannequin there and ran away or something. But then it spoke. It sounded like a robot or something. It was like it was programmed to say this. My mother said to ask someone for a phone in fear that I get lost. Do you have a phone? At this point, I was crapping my pants because 1, I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this older boy was dressed like a burglar and at my door with half his face covered. 2, for some reason, I just couldn't look away. I felt like if I moved or said anything other than yes, that I would explode. And 3, I saw 2 other boys around the same age standing in my driveway dressed exactly the same way as the one in front of me. Baggy jeans, dark hoodie, and scruffed up Vans. I began to stutter and shake my head. It was the only thing I could do. I finally got out a no and then started to close my door, but he put his foot in the way. Then the 2 others started walking up, and I was going, hell no. I grabbed the bat by the door and threatened him. If you don't leave right now, I'll kick your ass and then call the cops. I shouted loud enough so that at least one of my neighbors could hear, I hoped. Now, I was this short girl with SpongeBob pajama pants on. I was in no way intimidating. Then he moved his foot and stepped back into the middle of the other 2 perfectly. Then the far right one said in the exact same tone of voice as the first, I'm sorry to bother you. I'll just come again later and ask. Internally, I was planning my funeral. Just as I was about to close the door, the first one smiled and looked up. And that was when I saw that they had black eyes. Then the other 2 looked up, and they were the same. I was like, nope, and slammed the door shut, then called my neighbor, who was this big-ass 20-something-year-old dude. He ran over and looked for them all around my house, but he said they were gone. When I told my mom all of this, she didn't believe me and said I was lying. Said me, the girl with absolutely no social life, who was afraid of her own shadow, was lying. Back in the mid-'80s, we were traveling through Tennessee on the way to visit friends in Texas. Mom was driving, and I, a teenager at the time, was navigating by using a paper map, as these were the days before cell phones and GPS. We made it past Nashville on I-40 pretty late at night. We were maybe an hour outside the city. I was charting our progress old school with pencil and paper. We pass an exit, I mark it. A minute later, a summer thunderstorm hit. Visibility dropped to nothing. All traffic slows to a crawl, and we decide to pull off at the next possible exit and find a motel to spend the night because there's no way that we're making significant progress in this storm. Slow, white-knuckle driving ensues. An exit looms up on the right, no signage that we can see in the downpour, and we take it. At the top of the exit ramp, we turn right toward a brilliantly lit up gas station. It was a left turn onto an overpass crossing I-40 with no lights from that side of the interstate. We were on a dinky little road at that point. To our right, there was a gas station which we're rapidly passing. To our left and back behind some trees was what appeared to be a motel, but you couldn't make out the sign well in the rain. We drove past the gas station before we really realized that the road just ended ahead. The gas station was the only building on this side of the road. It went from a 1.5 lane that was paved to a 1-lane gravel road, we could see a short way ahead, to tire track dirt and grass, all over the space of maybe 20 yards. Now, we were past this gas station, and there was only one turnoff from this road. It was on our left. We took it and tried to back up and turn around to get back to the gas station. Unfortunately, the paved slope of that narrow, driveway-sized turnoff led steeply down into a huge mud pit. No backing up out of it. My mom put the car into low gear, turned hard, and headed back for the gravel road through the mud. We almost made it, but got mired out. The front passenger tire caught on the corner of an exposed concrete storm drain, maybe 3 feet from the road. Out of the car, into the rain and mud. We walked to the gas station. The place was spotless, super bright, and had 2 young men behind the counter. What sounded like one of Elvis's songs was playing on their radio inside. Attendants' first words on seeing us walk in were, "Did you get stuck in the mud?" They said it as a super enthusiastic, way too happy greeting. Like Disney staffer welcoming you as you walk into the park for the first time levels of happy. Also, these night shift clerks were dressed in suits that looked about 30 years out of date. The place was kinda creepy. We admitted that we had, indeed, gotten stuck. We asked if there was a towing company that we could call. They pulled out a phone book. Again, this was before cell phones or the internet, and started talking to each other. It was not a Nashville phone book, some little township. Population couldn't have been more than 100 from the handful of white pages, but the book had dozens of yellow pages of nothing but tow truck companies. Like literally hundreds of tow truck companies for this town too small to appear on the map. The attendants had a friendly debate about whose turn it was to get a car out of the mud. They decided to skip over the company who was theoretically next because there had been some sort of problem with them the last time that they were called out for a tow. They made a decision on who to call and let my mom use their phone. More weirdness, and the creepiness intensifies. It was still storming, though less at that point. The truck arrives maybe 5 minutes later, brilliant white, not a speck of dirt or a drop of mud on it. I've seen vehicles in a new car lot that were dirtier. The 2 young men in the truck are also dressed like they had just stepped out of the 1950s. They were wearing freshly polished patent leather shoes without a drop of mud on them, along with starched white shirts, paper hats, and bow ties. We hike across the street next door to the mud pit where our car is stuck. The tow truck guys are horrified. "They almost got out of the mud?" they say to each other repeatedly. The subtext from their shocked tone is clear. No one must ever, ever escape the mud pit on their own. These people will have to take some sort of action to make sure that no one else gets as close as we did to escaping. They tow the car out. Easy peasy. We all go back to the gas station. We pay the tow truck drivers for services. The drivers let the gas station attendants know that my mom and I almost made it out of the mud on our own. The attendants, again, are horrified and shocked by this. By now we're getting huge, uncanny valley vibes from all 4 of these men, and not just them, the whole place is too clean, too brightly lit, and too weirdly out of date. It was a surprisingly good facsimile of a small town rest stop populated by real humans. Almost perfect, in fact. We are definitely in Creepy Town. If these guys were humans, there was seriously something off about them. If they weren't, they almost had their ordinary human act down pat. The truck drivers leave. The attendants turn, all super friendly again, and ask Mom and me if we're going to stay the night in the hotel across the road. They're so excited that we might spend the night here. They talk about how great it is. Mom and I make non-committal noises and return to the car. I tell Mom we're not staying here tonight. She agrees wholeheartedly. The rain is finally letting up. We drive down I-40 to the very next exit. It was maybe 5 miles. We pull off and spend the night in a kind of crappy but ordinary motel. At least it's not the Bates Motel, we joke. The rest of the trip goes well. Then, several days later on the way home, Mom and I decide that we would really like to see the creepy town in the light of day. It couldn't have been that weird, could it? Heading back up I-40, we pass the exit where we actually did spend the night on the way down. We can see the hotel, the exit number matches the notes that I had made on the map, everything. Then we start looking for the next exit. The exit to Creepy Town. Should be about 5 miles along with an overpass. 5 miles pass. No exit. No overpass. 5 more miles later before we find the next exit off of I-40. It's the one that I had marked as being right before the storm first hit. In short, Creepy Town does not exist. I have traveled I-40 many times since, often remarking that, hey, there's that exit where the weird storm hit and we went to Creepy Town, and there's the exit that we actually did spend the night at. We never found the Creepy Town exit between those 2 points, ever again. "10 years ago, I was a stupid 18-year-old kid who was living with his parents in Flagstaff, Arizona. We moved almost every 3 years due to the nature of my dad's work, so I got to see most of the country. It was a Tuesday in November. My mom said that we were packing up the apartment and moving to Seattle for what was going to be another year and 2 months. I had a small 300cc motorcycle at the time. I think it was a V-Star, but I could be wrong. And decided to hook up a GPS and use the time to go on a ride across the West Coast. My mother didn't like the idea, but I knew that I would be safe due to personal experience and knowing when and when not to ride. Besides, it would be a 3-day trip and I would get to see all sorts of neat stuff along the way. I notified my job that I was going to transfer, threw on my saddlebags, and a day later was on the road. I made it all the way through western Nevada in order to avoid LA traffic, and stopped prior to taking the I-5 into California. That evening I stayed in a Days Inn hotel. After breakfast and a talk with the locals, I crossed through Reno into western Cali. From there, it was only 4 more hours until I reached Oregon. Luckily, I had time to spare, so I wanted to take some back roads and discover what this dank, damp state had to offer. It was fall, and there was a deep chill in the air. Riding through it sent shivers down my spine like nothing else. November's weather in Oregon is almost identical to that of Pittsburgh during that season. It makes you want to curl up into a ball and sleep for a decade, only to wake up and repeat the process all over again. Eventually, I got tired enough that I wanted to find somewhere to stay, and managed to see a sign advertising a Green Hills Hunting Lodge on the side of the road. It was accompanied by a long, steep hill that took me what felt like an hour to climb. Then, when I reached the top, I was greeted by a large and gorgeous cabin that looked like it was specifically made for weddings, like something ripped out of a fairy tale. Bewildered, I parked my bike, took off my bags, and threw a tarp over it, which was secured to bungee cords. I walked inside and met a Korean woman who was working the front desk. She spoke perfect English, but had a very distinct accent in which she explained to me that I could choose my room due to an abundance of vacancy. Cool, right? I chose room 31, as the entire building was all on one floor that evening. She handed me a key with the tag 31 attached via a keyring and tells me to have a good night. I throw all my stuff down and head to the bathroom to wash up after riding for an entire day. The room itself looks like a cabin and is absolutely gorgeous. The floorboards were all real wood. and even the shower had the same natural wood as the tub surrounding it. I take a shower and then head to bed, and realize that the mattress is incredibly comfortable and make myself cozy, only to realize that something is off. It's not something obvious, but I knew that there was some sort of oddity about this place. I push it to the back of my mind and fall asleep. The next morning, I wake up to find that the walls went from a natural brown to a deeper gray, as if they were stained overnight. This wasn't a result of natural lighting versus LED. The room was without a doubt a different color. I shrug it off and get all my stuff together, making sure that everything is still where I left it. I head out of the room to find that not only had the walls changed color, I was on a second floor that previously didn't exist. The light from the morning sun wasn't permeating the windows of the cabin, and there was no one in sight. I started to freak out, nearly having a panic attack because this wasn't right. Thankfully, there were stairs that I dashed down as fast as I could and made my way to the front desk and rang the bell once, twice, 3 times. I was breathing heavy and knew that I had to get out of there. No one was coming to check up on me after about 10 minutes of waiting, so I dashed out of the doors and into the lot. I ripped the tarp off of my bike and looked back at the lodge. It wasn't the same. This was a broken down, abandoned, dirty building that looked as though it was about to be condemned. I didn't want to ask any more questions, and rode off as fast as I could. That place still haunts me, even to this day. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it. Hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things that I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back toward civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly filled my car. Not just a whiff. A cloud of it filled the cab as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time, there was something else that I couldn't quite place. It lingered for a few moments, then went out just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank, and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself that it was just a dead animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was indeed about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight into the ditch and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light in there. It was just an empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the bush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes toward where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him that I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly back to my car as they drove away. Then I got the heck away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what had happened, trying not to let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and I put two and two together. It was sulfur that I had smelled. I asked if he thought that I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he simply responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy. He is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has seen, rather smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last encounter. I think I'm safe, right? Wrong. I moved last year and I recently thought, hey, remember those kids a few years ago? Funny, they can't get you now. Boy, was I ever incorrect. I live on a mountain, and like an hour away from the beach in a super populated neighborhood with my roommates. 2 chill lesbians and a college dude. Super cool people. I think nothing can hurt me now, because there are people everywhere. But no, I'm stupid and jinx myself. I was home 2 days ago. Class was canceled, and the dude of the house was home too and taking a nap. I'm in the kitchen watching Netflix and doing homework when there's a knock on the window. Obviously, this is weird as hell, but I have weird as hell friends. Maybe one of them are trying to scare me. I brush it off and continue what I was doing, and then it happens again. Once again, I brush it off because maybe it was the snow if it wasn't one of my friends. Things like this happen all the time with them. Well, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and I'm kinda starting to freak out. My friends don't have this much patience. I go to Charlie's room, the guy, and wake him up. I'm not the one that's usually riled up, so he's concerned too. We both go to the window. I have my phone out with the camera and 911 within a touch, and Charlie has a bat. We look out the window, and no one is there. After a minute, we calm down and go and sit in the living room. Charlie's mom is a cop, so he says he'll tell her about it later. We think we're okay, so we chill and watch TV together. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I go and open the door. At first, I don't see anything. Then, down on the bottom of the stairs of the apartment, I see 3 young boys dressed in black hoodies, jeans, with brown or black bangs. At first I didn't move, I was frozen in place. Then Charlie asked who it was, and I came to my senses and got a good look at the kids, then slammed the door shut behind me. I started bawling, and I mean sobbing. I had no clue what to do. Charlie's freaking out because I don't cry, especially in front of people like that. He ran to the door with the bat that we have on the windowsill and looked outside. He saw them too. He started freaking out because he didn't know what to do, so he started yelling at them to leave. He said they started smiling. I was crying even more now, and he was still screaming, and I think the neighbors wanted to call the cops. Now think about this. He didn't know what they were. He thought they were normal kids that had scared me. He didn't see their eyes yet. I started yelling at him to go inside when I hear a bunch of footsteps running up the stairs and Charlie screams and runs in. He's telling me he saw their eyes and that they were black, and now we're both freaking out and grabbing kitchen knives. Eventually we calm down and look outside again. No one's there, but we can see a group of kids past the complex with 3 that we think might have been the BEKs. I told him about the other thing that happened to me, and now we're scared to be in this house. We told the other roommates, and they thought we were high or something, so once again, no one believes me. This happened about 3 days ago, and I've been on edge ever since. Last night I was turning off all of the lights and getting ready for bed. I just had my flashlight from my phone to do some tidying up in the kitchen. I turn it off and go walk into the bedroom. Across from the kitchen, in the living room, there is a shadow. This was something that was different from the usual, as it clearly caught my attention. It was something that looked like a long shape peering in from the upper right side of the window, as if it was a long neck or just some weird shape, definitely abnormal. I was genuinely afraid, and kept turning the lights on and off to see when I could see it. It was only when it was completely black inside, and the street light and neighbor's porch lights were slightly illuminating the window. I tried to look out, but could only see myself in the blinds, and it really freaked me out. So I left the lamp by the window on, and after debating, I told myself not to wake my partner up because realistically it's nothing, and what could it be? I mean, we're on the 2nd floor. It seemed really close to the window, and it wasn't moving. I'm not one to believe in paranormal activities. In fact, every time I watch scary YouTube videos that claim to be true and have paranormal shadows or movements, I instantly think it's not true and get annoyed. Walking tonight with my partner, I remembered the situation from last night. I saw nothing on the outside that would show through the window and create the shape that I saw. I quickly went inside with him to see what I could see from the inside with all the lights out again. I was expecting to see it there, and that it was something that I just never noticed before. But it was gone. The window looks completely normal, and the lights outside are the same as they always are. I'll never know what it was, and next time I will definitely be waking up my partner if I see it. A few years ago, a friend and I took a road trip across country. We stopped at an out-of-the-way place in Wyoming late at night. As soon as we rolled up, we both felt as if it were haunted, but really needed to sleep, so we checked in and put anything paranormal out of our minds. The place was very run down. We had 2 beds in our room. Mine was closest to the door and window with a nightstand in between us. Also, we each had a little lamp above our beds. I laid down, clicked off my lamp, and was facing the window. While lying down, I saw a black, shadowy figure cross the length of the wall and then vanish. About 30 seconds later, after I had laid my head down, my friend began playing with my hair. I sat upright and said, "What the?" But she was in her bed, 5 feet away, reading her book. I didn't say anything because, as mentioned, we just wanted to sleep. Later that night, my friend woke me and asked if she could sleep in my bed with me. I said yes, but didn't ask why. That morning, we had confession time. I told her that I thought that she was playing with my hair, that's why I sat up in bed before falling asleep. She said that she had looked over and saw a black, shadowy figure hovering above me at the moment when I had looked up. During the night, after she had turned her light off, someone was playing with her feet, rubbing them, massaging them, etc. She couldn't get any sleep and was freaked out, which is why she cowered over to my bed. That morning, we asked the waitress in the very creepy stuffed animal heads on the wall, dark, musty coffee shop if the place was haunted. She said she wasn't allowed to comment on that. We pressured her to tell us the history of the place. She told us that the hotel used to be POW bunkers, where the Chinese had been held or something like that, around World War II. Anyway, I've wanted to go back for a while, and I'm wondering, have any of you had similar experiences? The hotel was in Wyoming, well off the beaten path. We have a house in the desert of Nevada that we think is haunted. I would often hear people calling my name clear as day from somewhere in the home, but later I would find out that there was no one there. These voices take the shape of one of my family members, like my sister, mother, father, or sometimes a child that I don't recognize. I never really paid attention to it because it was happening like twice a week. I got used to it, but like last week, I was vacuuming the house and I got to the end of the hall where my room is. I see my dog in my room and I just smile at her and she goes back to sleep. But when I turn around, I saw my dog again behind me. My dog never went past me, so there's no way that she could have gotten there without me noticing. I looked back in the room and see a child's head peeking out of my closet. I was so terrified that I ran out of the house and took a hotel for the night. I still don't know if it's a demon or a ghost or something else. The demon child, or whatever it is, didn't actually look like a child. It was almost like I just knew it was a child when I saw it. It's hard to explain. It has no nose, and it was bald with the eyes of a reptile. I can't quite explain any more details because I ran out of there so quickly. I'm in the process of moving out right now, and some even more strange and horrific things have occurred. I would have the most horrible dreams at this house, and this house only, for example. I have dreams of an abandoned warehouse, with a dead, decapitated baby head with a spine still attached, floating around and screaming while chasing me. I would also get severe sleep paralysis. There was a black, demon-like entity that looked like a snake that would climb walls and ceilings. Sleep paralysis has never happened to me before I moved here. I don't know if dreams can be linked to ghosts or demons. I would also see a shadow man lurking around my house from time to time. I thought it was my imagination. I wish it was. I would also hear something running down my hallway, and I would see a dog-like creature outside of my house. But it didn't really look like a dog. It was like 5 or 6 feet tall with long, jagged teeth and just roaming around outside. I thought I was going crazy, or that my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, but I really don't know. Whatever the thing is, I think it can take the shape of anything. It's probably not a ghost. It's probably a demon or an alien or a cryptid that can shapeshift. Like I said, I really don't know. I need your help to figure out what it could be. I will be moving out soon, and I'm not staying in the house anymore. I absolutely hate that place. For a little backstory, my partner and I have been dating for about 1.5 years. This February, I was given tickets as a birthday gift to finally visit him, as I'm in Scotland. Experience 1. I spent the middle of February over in Arizona visiting my partner. While we're both interested in the paranormal, I believe in it all, having had multiple experiences, whereas he tends to just humor me, not believing in it much himself. He's never mentioned anything odd happening in his apartment, but I saw, heard, and felt small things the first couple of days that I was there. One morning in particular at around 4 a.m. I was on the sofa playing on my phone. jet lag, when I looked up and saw a figure standing over him as he slept. It was similar to a shadow person phenomenon, just a dark humanoid shape, but it felt nasty. When I saw it, it turned, almost as if it was startled to see someone else in the room. Never mind, someone who could also see it. It did sort of a double take and then disappeared, but the energy in the room felt off. I performed a cleansing ritual that I've come to rely on when negative energies are bothering me. For the remainder of my trip, the apartment felt light and airy, with the exception of later that day when I was taking a nap and felt what I thought was my partner standing over me watching me sleep. I opened my eyes and felt the negative presence over me, as though trying to work out who I was and why I was there. It was then told in very clear terms that it wasn't welcome, whether I was there or not, and it cleared out. No more issues, so that was fine. Experience 2. My partner's friends, another couple, really helped in making me feel welcome, and the 4 of us went out on road trips a couple of times, once to Jerome and another to a recreational spot by a lake. I felt a little funny anytime we were driving around near or on the reservations, as though the native spirits were very much aware of us going through their land, but nothing felt bad, just sort of a curiosity. But one instance in particular sticks out. While driving toward Phoenix after a day at the lake, we were all chatting away in the car when we got into reservation territory. I got that not alone feeling again, but still, it was curious, though this time it was more intense. There was a lull in the conversation, and I was just admiring the landscape as the sun was going down, when in the middle of the center embankment on the road, there was a figure that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I know it was male, and I know that he was a Native American. Nothing felt wrong, but when I asked if anyone else had seen him, they all said no, despite the fact that, as far as I was concerned, you couldn't miss him. He was old, tall, and completely white. His clothes, hair, everything, with an aura of hazy light around him, simply standing and watching over the road. I don't know who he was, but it felt like he was watching over the people traveling through his land. It was comforting. Earlier today, I think I might have seen something, but I don't know. This happened a few hours ago while I was outside mowing my lawn. Quick layout of my yard. When you walk down my driveway toward the street, if you look to the left, you'll see a dead end, and if you look to the right, you'll see a big tree that you couldn't see through. This is relevant. Now, on to what happened. I was mowing the lawn inside my fence, and when I finished that, I went over to the part of my yard that was outside of my fence. After I finished mowing, I looked to the right and saw a pair of legs on the other side of the tree. All I saw was legs, because I couldn't see the person through the trees. But their legs were all black. Like I couldn't make out any features. I couldn't see any pants or shoes. It was just all pitch black. I'm confused, and so I try walking around the tree to see who it was, but whatever it was ran away. It only took me 2 seconds to get to the other side, but as I said, whatever it was gone. I live on the corner of my block, so there's nowhere that a person could have hidden that fast. I've never believed in the paranormal or had any sort of experience, but I really can't explain what happened. Anyone who's had a similar experience and could possibly give me an explanation, I would appreciate it, because I'm still confused. This paranormal encounter took place at the hotel I worked at last year. I was 20 years old, working at a small mom-and-pop hotel in Ontario, California. I had worked there for some time before I started to stay there for a few months. The owner taught me everything that I needed to know so that I can run his business while he went on a business trip to Africa. Mind you, I didn't have a car, so my only option was to stay there and work around the clock if need be. I didn't have to pay for the room, and I got to wash my clothes in the laundry room. There was a grocery store in walking distance, and restaurants all around me where I could get food at a discounted price since I worked at the hotel. I thought this was a sweet deal. One night, my boyfriend came down to visit, and while he was in the bathroom, I heard banging coming from the room next to ours. Then, I heard scratching on my walls. I told him to stop playing, and he didn't even know what I was talking about. The banging continued all night, so I called the front desk and told them that the people next to me were loud and that I had to be up at 6 to go down there to work. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me that she hadn't rented out the room next to mine. Mind you, I had an end room. I quickly ran outside to see if the curtains were open or closed, and they were open. I could see right into that room, and no one was there. I had never been so creeped out in all my life. I decided to sage the room to get rid of any bad spirits or energy, and that worked for a while, until it didn't. The next time, something demonic happened. I was asleep and kept hearing whispers in my sleep. I hate whispers with a passion, and they creep me out to the fullest. So I sat up in bed and I was looking around the dark room, and in the corner of the room, I saw white, glowing eyes staring at me. I felt frozen by its glare. I could see its body and saw that it was crouched down, holding its knees. Then I saw more shadows appearing closer and closer. I went to turn on the lamp next to the bed, and it didn't cut on. So my next thought was that I needed to run outside and get to safety. It took all the balls in the world for me to get up and do that. I was so scared that I couldn't even feel my legs. All I could feel was the cold wooden floor beneath me. I got to the door and flung it open, only to see that the bedroom curtains were on the outside of my room's window. The sky was black, and the clouds were a dark green with gray tint. I was mortified to realize that I was still asleep, and that I hadn't actually woken up. I looked back inside the hotel room and saw myself asleep in the bed. I screamed bloody murder, and that's when I jolted awake for real. I said a prayer and went back to sleep. The encounter that followed was even worse. Yet again, I could hear things in my sleep. I was terrified and couldn't move any part of my body. I began to pray in my head as loud as I could, only to wake and feel my body slam on the bed as if I had been levitating. I called my grandma the next day, and she said that it was a demonic attack. I got my car shortly after a few days later, and never stayed in that hotel again. I'm a die-hard agnostic skeptic with an open mind. I believe that anything is possible, but I want a logical and preferably scientific reason behind that anything. The last 10 days, however, have been absolutely insane. It started when I was a little kid. In my memories, I see kids between the ages of 5 and 11 with solid black eyes and smiles too big for their faces. I had a bad childhood, so I just figured they were added memories by an imaginative mind, because that's the answer that solidly fits my skeptical scientific worldview. Last month, I started seeing a girl. She told me about her experiences with sleep paralysis and shadow people. I explained to her that it was a rational experience caused by being in a hypnagogic state. Then she brought up the Cheshire Cat kids. Her recollections matched mine as a child. It was unnerving to say the least, and she and I spent almost an hour discussing the most minute details about them. Our stories matched. So, she does acid with her friends about 10 days ago, and told me that she stepped outside. A group of 6 of them were waiting for her. They showed her scenes from my life that were my darkest. She described them to me too accurately for her to have heard them from a second-hand source, which would be hard to do anyway, considering that I don't like sharing such detailed information. They then told her that I was going to die soon, and that she should stay away from me. This has put a monkey wrench into one of the most promising relationships of my 25 years. Since that night, I have nightmares of them coming into my room, licking my forehead, and showing me the memories of my past as if they were happening in that moment, complete with smells, sounds, sights, etc. I have written this part off as my subconscious mind reacting with my long-dormant PTSD, but they got more and more vivid. While this is happening, she has been distancing herself more and more. Last night was the weirdest part of the tale, however. I was driving down a windy country road to calm myself, and a pair of headlights flies from around a bend and runs me off the road, almost into a tree. When I looked, however, there was no car, and the headlights extinguished after passing me. I'm chalking all of this up to anxiety-started delusions and possible schizophrenia, but I cannot explain how she knew what she did, and why all of this is suddenly happening. A couple of years ago, me and my pops decided to go on a road trip. It was very out of the blue. I wasn't even expecting it, but I decided to go anyways. It would be some solid father-son bonding time. After driving for what seemed like a couple of hours, was around maybe 8 to 9 p.m., we pulled into this gas station for snacks, water, and to use the bathroom, and we went back inside of our car. Keep in mind, this gas station was basically in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, we got back into our car and decided to look for a motel, but there was none. And I mean not a single one anywhere near us. My dad was really tired, so we just decided to go to sleep in the vehicle. We pulled up into this sort of resting area / parking lot and decided to pass out for the night. My dad fell fast asleep, but I was on my phone for a couple more hours, and around 11 p.m. I just felt suffocated by the tense air and decided to step out for a bit. I felt safe because the gas station was still in sight, and there would be a couple of trucks that would occasionally drive by, so I was at ease. At the time, I was also texting my friend who lives in Seattle, Washington. We were on the phone for a little while. Then I saw what looked like a large cornfield, and I had never actually seen a cornfield in real life, so I decided to cross the road and just get a closer look. That's exactly what I did. I got extremely close, and I started feeling like I was being watched, but again I just thought, well, you're literally outside in the dark, standing next to a tall cornfield, of course you're going to feel this way. So I just brushed it off. I even considered going in, but I thought, why would I even do that? So anyways, I just decided to take a step back when I noticed a barn. It was a large, white barn with red, maybe black stripes. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it was definitely a barn. I was stupid and young when this happened, maybe 14 or 15. Out of curiosity, I decided to go check it out, and the barn was next to the cornfield, sort of tucked in a little. I literally thought, haha, I wish I could see something that would freak me out, as a joke, because I never really thought that anything would happen, and I love being scared. Anyways, I started making my way toward the barn. As I was getting closer and closer, I remembered very vividly that I was wearing no socks, just slip-on slides. I remember the dirt rubbing against my toes as I stepped. I remember sending pictures to my friend in Washington. I jokingly was saying that I saw something and that I was going to check it out. As I got closer, I saw something. It was behind the barn, but sort of off to the side, like how when someone peers around a corner. I thought it was a bell. Literally, I assumed that it was a bell attached to the corner of the barn, so I just walked a little closer. Even as I'm writing this, I am getting goosebumps. I walked closer and saw the head of someone or something just peering around the corner at me. At that moment, I just straight up froze. My fight or flight was out of function because there I was literally seeing someone or something peering at me. After about 5 to 10 seconds, the noise that Snapchat makes when you get a notification snapped me out of it, and I just ran as fast as I could across the road to my dad's car and got in. I felt a sense of relief wash over my body. Somehow my dad was not awake. Me gasping for air wasn't enough to wake him from his deep sleep. I really considered waking him up and telling him what I saw and that we had to leave, but he would just assume that I was joking or having an episode. Which sounds dumb, but he's assumed that before, since he never has believed in anything paranormal or anything out of the ordinary related. I took deep breaths and just texted my friend telling her what I saw, and even she didn't believe me. I don't blame her. And I wouldn't blame any of you either. Sometimes I have a hard time actually believing what I saw. But I know that it was real. I was sober and fully aware. But from the bottom of my heart, the part that disturbs me the most is that whatever was peering at me from around that corner was very tall. At least 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and every time I think about this, I get a sense of dread and paranoia. I haven't told any of my family or my dad, but if any of you have a clue as to what I might have seen, please let me know. Again, I wasn't hallucinating. This was before I even figured out anything about psychedelics or drugs in general. Please let me know if you have any ideas or info. Also, it probably sounds fake because if someone came to me telling me what I'm saying, I would also just rule it out to be fake. But please, I've been trying to piece it together for the last couple of months. I was sort of 50-50 on paranormal encounters, but after that experience, I believe. I believe in walkers to Wendigos. I believe in ghosts to La Llorona. It has changed me, knowing what's out there. And everyone wants to believe, oh yeah, ghosts aren't real. But I feel like they are deep down. We know that there is some messed up stuff out there in this world. And I happened to encounter something. I would like to preface by saying that I am a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly more darker in nature. I know very little of demonology, other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I try to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult and I was not prepared. In October of 2018, I was admitted to the hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the IV, so I was able to move around and assist the other women, who weren't as mobile, in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved into the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, it would have looked as if I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman that I helped argue with herself about me. She stated that I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating that I am not what I seem or something to that effect, and it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold, really fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and free her from any negative influences. It was then that I heard her say these words very loudly. I don't know the Lord's Prayer, and my name. I freaked out, quickly processing what had just happened. The woman knew that I was praying over her, and there was no way that she could have known that. In my mind, I instinctively knew that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak, and still recovering. I got up from my bed, and with my back to her, I said something like, "There's no way I can stay here now." To which she answered, "Yes, go. I won," and laughed really hard. I was amazed that the other 2 women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this occurred. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said that I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to call me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said that he would be in at 7 a.m. and that I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door, and that was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital, and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening though, so I couldn't leave anyway, and chose to just stay in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in, with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical, as fear for my family took root and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued calling me names, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk, where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number, 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if that was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming that I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name that I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the first night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying, and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow that he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room awaiting the doctor. The voices were still verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the IV catheter in my arm. On my return, they placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was allowed to recover in peace. And eventually, the mnemonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes and bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than just keep moving on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said that other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of was a long stretch that had only one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we were pulling out of the neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy or 2 boys and 1 girl. I didn't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. One, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line not doing anything but staring? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top. There weren't any streetlights. They were just standing there in the dark, not doing jack except for being creepy as hell. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side where I was obviously sitting. And of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought that at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfits so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they did have faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw that their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home until the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be afraid anymore. Of course, no one believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were just full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought that they were spirits. But after a few months, I heard about the Black-Eyed Children on YouTube, or something that made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten all about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope that my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across the soccer field is amusing at least. When I was a kid, I was with my family on a road trip a few hours away. We were driving down through a winding canyon, and it was dark. I was looking out my window, just staring at the dirt walls that we were passing. It was like the inside of cliffs on one side and forest on the other. Well, I was on the side of the car with the dirt hills and the cliff walls, and as we turned to go around a bend, I saw something human-shaped, which looked like it had a long, white face that resembled the Scream mask, hanging on the hillside. It happened so fast that it scared me to death nearly. I never said anything. I think it was because I wasn't sure what I had just seen, but I really don't think that it was a human being. This vivid memory is still clear as day. This happened many years ago, so I don't remember many details, but the experience still feels vivid. It is important to be mentioned that the bedroom where I was has a view to the backyard and the kitchen. So, my story took place at my previous home when I was 10. I was alone with my sister, who was 4 at the time, but later my parents came home after Mass. The TV was on and showing a comedy program, but I wasn't very interested. After some time, I noticed what I thought was a person in the corner of my eye. But at a second glance, I realized it wasn't exactly a person. It was a child with curly hair. The silhouette resembled that, and my reaction was nothing but freak out. I was losing my mind, thinking about going to find out what it was or call someone. My sister was sleeping, so she didn't know about it until I told my parents. After some minutes, I managed to calm myself down and wait in that room until my parents came home. Nobody believed me at that moment. And during those years, we didn't have any cameras or smartphones. Some years later, I found out about shadow people, and my experience fits with the stories told. I don't know what to think about that, but always remember that day, even after I moved out. I believe in the paranormal, but am skeptical about most of the stories that people tell. It's extremely hard to distinguish between a fabricated story and a true story when you can't see facial expressions or hear changes in a person's voice. About a week ago, I was sitting in my kitchen browsing the web, probably Reddit, on my phone. My kids had been asleep for about an hour, and my wife was in our room finishing up a paper for work. There wasn't a radio or television on. While browsing in complete silence, I heard my wife cough several times. The cough sounded as if she had breathed in some water and was trying to get it out of her lungs. Jokingly, I jumped out of my chair and ran over to the room where she was sitting. I started patting her back and pulling her earlobes down, again in a joking manner. She looked at me like, "What the hell?" So I told her I was trying to help since she had coughed so hard. She, still with the what the hell face, looked at me and said that she hadn't coughed. I stood there and evaluated what I may have heard. I thought it might have been one of my kids, but the cough was from a woman. It wasn't a 4-year-old or 1-year-old girl's cough. Other things about this cough is that it came from inside the house. It was the type of hack like after water goes down the wrong pipe. It was one succession of coughs, about 4 of them together. How did the coughing not continue if the coughs were heard that hard at the beginning? It didn't and still does not make sense. But that's not the only thing that happened. Fast forward to the next morning. My kids are awake and eating in the kitchen. I'm in the living room watching TV, still waking and drinking coffee, and my wife is in our room getting ready for the day. All electronics are off except the TV and our phones. My wife's phone rings from what sounds like the kitchen area. She runs to the kitchen to answer it because she was expecting an important phone call from work. She searches for her phone in the kitchen, but does not find it. She asks if it was my phone that rang, but I told her no. My phone was in my pocket. Turns out both my wife's work phone and personal phone are in our room on the other side of the house. We checked the kitchen and surrounding rooms for anything that could have made the ring, but we found nothing. I don't know the name of the ringtone, but it's a very common ringtone for iPhones. My wife and I searched for the reasoning of why we clearly heard a phone ring in the kitchen, but no matter how hard we tried, we were unable to find a logical explanation. I was going to write it off as just another weird coincidence, but I kept thinking of how clear the phone ringing was, and how my wife had heard it too. Add this one to the cough that I heard the night before, and I start to worry that there may be an intruder in my attic. I think, nah, not possible. But I have 2 little girls and a little boy too. It's a slim chance, but I'd feel better if I just went up there and checked. I texted my wife to watch the kids because I was worried that there might be an intruder. I didn't want to verbalize it because if they were up there, then they would hear me. I check outside and around the house first for any signs of a person being on the roof, or anything like that. I look for cuts in the wall, and see no signs of intrusion whatsoever. I then grab the ladder to get inside the attic. The only way into this attic is through a small 2x4 foot opening at the top of the interior of a closet in one of the rooms. I grab my flashlight and my gun, set the ladder up, and plan on entering the attic as quickly and tactfully as possible. I don't want the intruder to be lying in wait. I push the drywall that blocks the opening and can hear a door swing and shut. I say swing because it sounded like a door that was on a hinge or hinges. I can't get the drywall off, and the element of surprise is now gone. I push through anyway and inspect the attic. The attic has no floorboards. You have to navigate through it by standing on the supporting beams. It's extremely annoying to have to go up there to do housework. I find no signs of anyone being up there, no entry points, and again, no cuts in any of the walls. I come down and double check that my wife and kids had stayed in the living room like I had asked in case there was an intruder. She confirms that they were, and that no door had been shut. I pretty much already knew that the door shutting wasn't them because the sound came from the attic, but there's no door in the attic. I went through a checklist of explanations to the cough, the phone ring, and the door shutting, and again, have yet to encounter a single one that makes sense. I know it sounds weird, but a freaking portal is what I'm coming up with. I lived in this house for years, and have always heard weird noises, but never something like this. Most portal stories I've heard sound totally far-fetched. Usually a portal story includes a demon or something spiritual, but this was just totally random. People crossing dimensions to hang out in my attic. There's no malice, no sightings, no physical evidence, but the sounds were definitely heard and are inexplicable. Something else happened a few nights ago. It was around 11 p.m. I'm asleep in bed and am woken up to my wife shaking me. She tells me that she heard a door close. I say to her that it may be our 4-year-old, but she says she was watching the monitor and the cameras were on the kids. She said that she had been watching the monitor because she had been hearing weird noises. I say maybe it's just the house creaking. She claims that she heard the windows shake. Now this is significant to me because we do have some old windows. The difference between the old and new windows is that the old windows will rattle when a door is shut due to air pressure or when the house is shaking, earthquakes, and the new windows won't. So she heard a door close and the windows shake. That's enough for me to grab my gun and check for an intruder yet again. I do an interior and exterior check and of course find nothing. I go back to bed and once again conclude that there is a portal in my house. I'm an OTR truck driver, which means that I drive across the country multiple times in a month-long period. I'd like to share a story with you. On the dark July night around 2 a.m., I was headed south on US 93 highway in Nevada. I was approximately 30 miles north off of Las Vegas. Traffic was scarce. I had not seen a single vehicle for at least 40 minutes. The only source of light that illuminated the road were the truck headlights. I was on the phone with a friend of mine just chatting about random stuff when in the distance about 300 feet ahead of me I saw something on the shoulder of the road. At first I thought it might have been a turned over construction sign or a bag of some sort. But as I was approaching the object, I started to make out some features. It was a human-like figure, I thought. Just to be clear, that area is deserted and there's absolutely nothing to be found within a 25-mile radius. When I was about 5 yards away, I could see it clearly. It was a boy. He was around 8 to 10 years old, I'd say. He had a school backpack and a white plush bunny in his right arm held tightly against his chest. He was just standing there with his cold stare, completely unemotional, looking me directly in the eyes. He didn't break the stare as I passed him. He didn't even blink or flinch, and let me remind you that it's an 80,000-pound semi-truck moving at 65 miles an hour. My heart was racing. My whole body was covered in goosebumps. A cold chill went down my spine. I don't think that I have ever been so disturbed in my life since I've never had any paranormal encounters. Once I passed him, the first thing that came to my mind was that if I see him appear again a couple of miles ahead, I'm gonna have a heart attack. But thankfully, it never happened. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I still don't know what it was. I'm not trying to claim that it was a ghost or the spirit of a deceased child. I just can't find any adequate explanation to it. It was definitely not a hallucination since I was wide awake and talking on the phone. It just seems weird to me. What in the world was a 10-year-old kid doing by himself in the middle of a desert? For some background on the house, it was built around 1650 near Oxford, England. My parents are well off, so it's pretty nice. Big, but not excessive, in a small village, and it's right next to a graveyard. As in, we have an outbuilding, which is an old blacksmith's forge, that literally sits on top of the graveyard, and our garden lowers compared to the graveyard wall because the place is so full of bodies. It was originally one house, then split to 3 with a small cottage, then to 2 houses, and I live in the slightly bigger of them. The house has been a pub, too. We still have a door from when it was. The land dates way back. We have 2 Roman wells on the property, one covered by the patio and one that's full of earth in the garden, which had Roman artifacts surrounding it that had been put there by some old residents. It is really ancient, so it makes sense that it's haunted, right? My family moved in February of 2015. My dad, my mom, my older sister, and me. We had no idea of any of the shit in this house at this point. At first, there were just some weird vibes. We heard some strange noises, some doors closing on their own, but nothing to freak out about. Apart from in the section of the house where no one slept in. Our then spare room in a small upstairs wing of the house. Our printer was kept down there, and whenever my mom sent me to get printouts, I would always sprint away as fast as I could out of fear. I used to cry and protest about going down there because it felt so terrible. There was just a thick air of terror. We actually got the village priest in to bless it about a year later. I went to a Christian school, and my mom thought that it would put me at ease. Instantly, all bad stopped down that side of the house, and my sister suddenly moved rooms down to it, and her old room became our spare room, and instantly got that same thick, heavy air. A few months in, maybe April, my mom had a weird experience of the corner of the duvet being tugged on, and then a creature crawling up her back. It wasn't sleep paralysis, as she had had that before, and she could move. It was heavy, crawling up her back like a person, and it got to her head and disappeared. A lady came round. She heard the house got new owners. She had lived there in the 1970s, and told my mom that she had had the exact same experience of the tugging and the crawling, and also that her piano played itself, among a few other weird experiences, before my mom mentioned anything about what she had experienced, and my mom's heart sank. She didn't tell me anything, until a few weeks later when I came to her in tears, saying that I had seen a shape walk into the room and then disappear, and have something tug at the duvet and walk up the front of my body, and that it was definitely not sleep paralysis. That's 3 people having the same experience, give or take how the person is laying, without communicating it. Odd. I can't explain the feeling. By this point, we were all aware of some weird stuff. We found chicken bones in the roof of our cellar, which is way older than the rest of the house, possibly like 1500s. We had doors slamming. We had footsteps. But then, my dad had an experience. He has never believed in ghosts. He's lived in old houses for a long time. He's had family friends have terrible experiences with the paranormal. He grew up Catholic, and he didn't believe anything up until about January of 2016. My mother, sister, and me were all in the kitchen, and he was walking past the spare room and heard shuffling coming from inside. He shouted my mom's name, asking if it were her, and a deep, gravelly voice replied, "Try again." He ran down the stairs, white as a sheet. At this point, it was 2017. Everyone had been through something in the house. Shapes would walk by, disembodied footsteps roamed around at night. We had objects moving, watchful eyes on your back, chairs moving, inexplicably cold rooms. Pretty typical things for a haunted house that were happening basically on the reg. Also at this point, I made some new friends and started inviting them around. The spare room had a double bed, so that's where we would have slumber parties. I had several friends ask me, "Hey, did you hear that knocking sound on the walls or the drawers last night?" Every time they came over, all of them left with very similar accounts. I would then relay my stories and watch them turn pale. It was fun for me, probably not for them. I had some friends over again, and we made a point of shutting the door to see if it would open, and it did. We all had trouble sleeping that night. In 2018, I had a German student exchange at school, and my exchange partner slept in the spare room. On the last night of her stay, I had something knock on the slats underneath my bed. It woke me up, but I fell asleep again, and it woke me up again a few minutes later, and knocked while I was awake. I left the room and told whatever it was to get out, and it did. I slept fine for the rest of the night. It did not like that the German girl was in the spare room. Around this time, our next-door neighbors walked up to us one day and asked if we had had our house exorcised because of how terrible things were for them. Heavy footsteps would stomp around their house. They heard the disembodied crying of children and playing their glockenspiel in the middle of the night. They were terrified and presumed that the increased disturbance was because we had had it blessed. We didn't, but at this point the activity did slow. Every now and then from late 2018 to 2020, we had banging and footsteps and touching and noises again, the usual. Nothing that phenomenal, just small, creepy, unexplainable happenings. Lockdown was uneventful until November of 2020, when we had our kitchen remodeled. The kitchen was kinda remaining from about 30 years ago, so I reckon that it really made the ghosts mad to have it changed. They were mostly fine with us in the house now. They knew us. We had lived there 5 years after all. But our builder they hated. He worked during the day when me and my sister were at school, my dad at work, and my mom, who works from home, would run errands. One day he asked my mom if someone else lived with us. She said no, and asked why, and he said that he had heard footsteps in my room above the kitchen, and doors slamming, and voices and noises during the day that started from the moment that we were all out of the house. He also heard footsteps walk into the kitchen and stand behind him, thinking that it was my mother and striking up the conversation, but realizing that she was out of the house when she didn't reply, and that there was nothing there. Several times he thought someone was there with him, and heard them move and breathe when they weren't. He's a 6'2" burly, muscular firefighter, and he also felt a larger person, bearing in mind everyone in my house is 5'6" to 5'8", and we always hit our heads walking around. Leaning over him and looking over his shoulder, feeling them in his space. You know when someone stands next to you, and there being nothing there. Seeing this giant, petrified, was quite funny in all honesty, but also very strange. This brings us to present day. Yesterday, I was going to go with my mom to go shopping. I thought her car had started, so I ran into the spare room to look out the window in the driveway to see her car, and she hadn't. I shrugged it off and kept looking out for a couple seconds, when I heard shuffling and breathing behind me. I spun around, and on the other side of the double bed was a kid. A young boy, maybe about 6. He was staring at me. He was pale, dark-haired, and dirty. He looked sick, malnourished. He didn't feel scary or mean. He just felt sad, and the room was freezing. I would have thought that he was a real kid if he didn't look so out of place. We looked at each other for what felt like a lifetime, but was really only about 3 seconds. And I sprinted out of the room and yelled for my mom. I relayed the story to my parents, and they were horrified. My dad went to look and saw nothing. My mom went upstairs and said there was the same thick, heavy air throughout the whole upstairs area. It's almost like a portal opens up and the house feels so unnaturally wrong and hostile. It's unlike anything I've ever felt before in my life. Seeing it was easily the most scared that I've ever been. It reminds me of when my neighbors said that they had heard children. I'm an atheist, but I slept with a crucifix next to me last night, not taking any chances. I was raised to understand and live in harmony with the paranormal. There were a lot of spirits and odd happenings surrounding me when I was younger. I've never really liked being alone in the dark, but I don't remember being afraid of anything supernatural until one night. I was about 13, and we had recently moved into my aunt's old house. I immediately disliked the house, and especially my room. They just felt wrong. Still, we set everything up. We put my 4-poster bed against the wall in such a way that my headboard was in a corner, and my footboard sat right against the light switch. So if I laid on my bed and looked down, I saw the light switch, doorway, and top of the footboard. I had a big window to my right, with a street light just outside it. My bedroom door wouldn't close and the hallway light stayed on. Anyway, I started to see shadowy figures during the day and night, but that was pretty normal. I woke up a few nights to tiny footsteps and cackling. I assumed they were goblins being annoying. I always felt watched. The first night something seemed wrong, I woke up hanging halfway off of my bed. I couldn't see any light or figure out how I was even laying. Finally, I found my footboard. I reached out much further than the switch should have been and turned on the bedroom light. As soon as I touched the switch, I could see the street and hallway lights again. About 2 nights later, I woke up just in time to see a dark figure appear over my footboard. It looked like a man's head and shoulders with thick black material draped over it. There were no facial features, and the blackness continued like it had a body, but no arms or anything. When I think back, it reminds me of the Dementors from Harry Potter, but it slithered up over my footboard. I could feel the weight, and I could move, but it seemed like a bad idea. So I closed my eyes. I felt the weight continue up to my chest, pause, and disappear. I opened my eyes, and it was gone. I felt strangely better in the house after that, and I haven't seen it since. It was still one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I don't know what it was, or who it was looking for. This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Iowa in a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, etc., but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m., and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. While outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything, so Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then, as he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He saw the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost, and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy, and told her that he could get her a glass of water and that he can call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable allowing her in his home. He felt something off about the little girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 a.m, and I don't feel right letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in to use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up so that they could keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard someone punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was still the little girl, and that she was the one who had punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes, and she said in a deep voice, "Let me in." Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looked right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him, and giggled before she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared. I live in a small town, and things like rumors tend to spread pretty quickly since folks around here are incredibly nosy beings. The most trusted source of these rumors is the local bar located in the center of the small settlement that we live in, which my father visits frequently. It is right by the school that I go to. Anyway, 2 weeks before all this bullcrap started, he came back with quite the story. It is said that something off has been going on with our town's graveyard, which is right by these creepy old woods a little bit away from the town itself. Usually takes 20 minutes to get there by car. Apparently, drunkards there claim that there's a medium disguised as a homeless man hanging around the woods surrounding the graveyard, and that sometimes he can even be found by the graves eating bread. At first, I didn't believe it, so me and my friend decided to walk to the graveyard and hang around there trying to find that guy. So we did, and the graveyard was full of people for a few hours, but the normal kind of people. A few more hours passed, and soon there was no one left except for an old, bearded man on the bench by the football field across the woods in the parking lot. He was looking at empty plastic bags with a box of cigarettes resting beside him. Nothing suspicious. My friend had the guts to walk up to him and insult him. I walked away from her, but when she crossed the line, I pulled her away, telling her that he may be a serial killer or a crazy drug addict. But he remained quiet until she yanked her hand away from mine, grabbed his box of cigarettes, and crushed it under her feet. She also threatened to hurt him if he didn't speak, and that's when he stood up and looked her dead in the eyes, and he was much taller than her too. He told her something along the lines of, "You are a disgrace in the eyes of God," and walked away onto the road until we lost track of him. I started to worry, and told her that maybe he was a priest or a monk, and now was going to tell everyone in our town how she had mocked him, and I was actually afraid. She reassured me that he was none of these things, because he had cigarettes with him, but I think those weren't even his. That night I slept over at her house because I was scared to go back to mine alone. I woke up in the middle of the night, and since I was sleeping in the same bed with her, I had a clear view of the pitch-black shadow of a man standing over her right beside her bed, his palm on her wrist. I raised my body, getting ready to stand up, but he turned his head to me and started to shake it from left to right. So I figured it was a lucid dream and rolled over to the other side, drifting back to sleep. The next morning, she looked pale and ghostly, and I asked her if she got enough rest. She informed me that she did not even sleep, and kept having problems with her breathing and her heartbeat. I was so scared that I almost pissed myself right there and then, and as of now, I am home alone and feeling like I am being watched. I finally talked my friend into moving from Seattle to Texas. We decided to split the move into 2 parts. The first one last week, moving her stuff in a rented SUV. We both had some time, and we decided to take the trip on all the back roads. We stayed at a mineral springs resort in the middle of nowhere in Oregon that was amazing. On the second day, we got up to drive to Vegas. We took US 50, which is known as the loneliest highway in America. I will admit that before this, it had been 8 to 10 hours before we had had any human contact. I am a former over-the-road trucker and a US veteran, so I'm used to traveling to different places and being in new surroundings every day, but it also taught me to listen to my instincts. Let me tell you, did they come in loud and clear while on this trip a few hours away from Vegas we stopped to get gas. As we rolled into the place, I just thought it looked aged, very dated. My friend decided to get gas. I walked inside to look at the place and get some snacks. I can honestly say that I can't point to any one thing that was wrong, but the feeling that overcame me was indescribable. It basically told me that the place was, well, the phrase that I would use is out of place, and that I needed to go right then. Now, I'll admit that this could be my own experience, and maybe because I had such a bad feeling that I was imagining things, but the minute I decided to leave, without buying anything or even using the restroom, I swear everybody in the place started looking at me. And I don't mean just the employees, but the patrons. I walked quickly to my car and told my friend that if she believed in instincts, that we should just get in the car and leave right that second. We did, and we did not breathe easy until we were about 10 miles away. That was my spooky encounter in the middle of Death Valley. When I was around 12, maybe 13 years old, I'm 24 now, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. We watched movies and ate junk food, a usual occurrence when I got to see him. My brother was also usually with us, but this time he was staying with a friend that night. I decided it was time for bed around 11 that evening. I went for my routine, getting ready for bed. He decided that it was time for bed around 11 that evening, and I went about my usual routine, getting ready for sleep. I laid down and tried to pass out. I was restless this night for some reason, just feeling completely uneasy. My bed used to be vertical to the door with my feet closest to the door. I always used to sleep with my door open. I guess it gave me some comfort being able to see half of the entrance to my dad's door, knowing that he wasn't far away. Anyway, as I said, I just couldn't get to sleep. And frustrated, I laid there staring at my ceiling for a moment, and then felt as if someone were watching me. I shifted my eyes to the doorway, and a pitch-black figure was standing there, its head almost touching the top of the frame. I've never had an issue with sleep paralysis, and never have had it since, but then, in that moment, I could not move. All I could do was look at this tall figure that stood there, staring at me. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and my heart felt as if it were going to beat out of my chest. I managed to barely whisper, "Dad?" And it turned its head sideways at me as if it were confused. I began hyperventilating intensely, which must have woken my dad because he came running into my room, and as he came through the door, the figure dissolved, as if a breeze came by, and it went away with it. My dad held me as I cried. I slept in his room that night, and for the rest of my stay there until I went back to my mom's. This event shook me to my core, and to this day, I cannot and will not sleep with an open door. I still have a deep feeling of fear, and almost want to cry when I picture that thing and remember that night. I thought I would share some of my experiences from living in a haunted house. I lived there for 14 years, just moving out of it last September. I'll start with the disclaimer that I was not a believer. I always thought ghosts were fascinating, but I never looked for them blindly. Most of my early experiences I tried to find real explanations for. Honestly, this house had countless things happen, but I'll just relay some of the bigger ones. It was a townhouse, and the floor plan was living area upstairs, bedroom downstairs. You entered the house on the top floor. My first night sleeping there, my bedroom was under the living room. I heard footsteps walking across the living room all night long, to the extent that I grabbed my framing hammer a few times and snuck up there, convinced that someone had broken in. This happened repeatedly for years, and I convinced myself that it was noise traveling through shared floor beams with neighboring units. Although it still happened often, even when the unit that I shared a wall with was vacant for 18 months. There were also a lot of odd times when doors would crack open slightly and close. Several times this happened when my mom's dog was over. He would walk towards a door, it would open for him. We would walk through it, and it would literally close behind him. When he would come to leave the room, the door would let him out again. Very weird. At some point, my now wife moved in, and it escalated. One night, I woke up in bed and saw an opaque figure sitting up in our bed, initially thinking that it was my wife sitting upright and looking out the window. When I asked what she was doing and she didn't reply, and went to shake her shoulder, my hand just went through nothing. I then realized that she was asleep on the pillow, and whatever was standing there had just vanished. I jumped out of the bed and looked everywhere for an answer. Nothing could be found. I told her about it months later, and she said, "Oh God, I have seen so many strange things here, and I didn't want to tell you because you would have thought I was crazy." There was a lot of little things. She would yell for me from upstairs because she swore that she just saw me walk past the kitchen doorway, etc. Often things would move from where we put them. Once near Christmas, we left the house and came back to the lights being turned on, that we know weren't turned on, and ornaments on our tree having been rearranged. We got a break at some point for a while, and when we were in bed one night, bedroom door closed, we made a joke about how our ghost hadn't been active for a bit. And as soon as we said it, the bedroom door started shaking hard in place. Final share, and the one that people seem to think is the creepiest. When our daughter was born, we would shush her to nap with the 3 shush method, rocking her in our arms, saying shh, 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 over and over. Well, I had put her down, and I ran to the hardware store. My wife called and said, "I thought you were at the hardware store," and I said, "Yeah, I am now." She paused and yelled, "Get home now." I ran back. It was a 3-minute drive, and my wife was holding our daughter. She said that after I left, our daughter started fussing, and over the baby monitor she heard the shh, shh, shh. And she got confused because she hadn't seen me go back downstairs, not realizing I was already down the hill when the noises started. One last one, daughter related. When she got a few years older, maybe 3 or 4, she would cry at night, and one night I went in and asked her what was wrong. She said that she was scared of the shadows. I showed her that the shadows were just light tricks, and I did a shadow puppet. And she said, "I'm not scared of those shadows. I'm scared of the scary shadows that come sometimes." That honestly freaked me out a little. Again, there were tons of other incidents, but these are sort of a greatest hits. People have asked me why I stayed in the house for so long, and as funny as it sounds to some, it was never scary. There was no feeling of malevolence or harm. In fact, I always thought the shushing of my baby story was more of a "wow, this ghost is nurturing" kind of thing. Or maybe even my dad coming back to visit. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed my spooky stories. I was home alone on Thanksgiving. It was 2015 around evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal, oh shit moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I actively started trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a second I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's literally when I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned all my lights on, and started watching TV while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I felt like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was last watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was around 2 a.m., and the lights were all off, and there was only static on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if Dish were to go out. I would get a channel listed as an HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show two people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work, but no one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone that was at 63% dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. I also saged the house and brought a lot of different surahs, psalms, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging sound on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or something coming back, or just kids playing a prank, but I was so terrified. This took place in 2012 when I went to Rome for a vacation with my family for about 3 weeks. It was a week before I had to go back home, so my dad wanted us to visit the town that he was from, so his cousin drove us to the house that he owned. To give everyone some backstory, it belonged to a duke back in the day. But anyway, we got there and nothing seemed odd at all, except that when his cousin showed us where I and my grandmother would be sleeping, because there were not enough rooms and beds. I and my mom had to share a room with 2 single beds, and my dad slept with his cousin. As soon as I walked into this room, something felt off, because it was icy cold, freezing cold, and it felt like I was being watched. Even my mother felt the same thing, that something was weird about that room, because the other rooms in the house did not have that same energy. I even told my father that something didn't feel right, that I didn't want to stay there, that I wanted to leave, that I got a bad feeling being in that room. It was like my gut was telling me that something was there that was not supposed to be. However, it was enough to freak me out and just give me a bad feeling. The day progressed, and it was nighttime, and walking back in that room, I got really bad vibes, and I told my mother that I didn't want to stay there, that something just wasn't right, that I could feel it. She said, "Well, look, it's only for a night." As we got ready to head to sleep, she went toward the bed, and all of a sudden the bed fell, and it was almost as if someone had pushed it. It really scared me. It somehow landed near the fireplace in the room. As my mom called out to my dad and his cousin, they fixed the bed. I was freaked out to say the least. Anyways, at that moment, me and my mother just prayed to help us get through the night and protect us from whatever was in there. I did not sleep well, and as soon as the morning came, I was ready to nope out. I took a picture of the bed with my camera, and after looking at it, you could see a black shadow near the fireplace hovering over the bed, and it was super creepy. I traveled quite a bit when I was younger, specifically in the Pacific Northwest of the US, as that's where I'm from. Whenever my single mother, older sister, and I took a break at the various rest stops along the way, I was almost always met by an older woman, likely in her 50s, early 60s. She offered my sister and I a variety of treats, generally hot cocoa and cookies, or lemonade depending on the weather. We always took it graciously. I think my mom assumed that we always bought the things with our allowance at the little shop that's sometimes integrated into the rest stop buildings. But I always remember that woman being at a white plastic table with black legs and never charging us any money. She never spoke. She was the highlight of many trips. I always felt safe and attribute her presence with my love for road trips and rest stops in general. Well, I brought her up a few years back in conversation with my mom and sister, and while my sister seemed to remember her, my mom did not, and pointed out how ridiculous that would be. I honestly hadn't thought much of it since I was 8 or 9, and just took her to be part of the travel experience. But our trips spanned everywhere between Idaho and California, and I know that I saw her at least once every trip from ages 5 to 8. As the chances of us coincidentally meeting so often without my mom noticing are very slim, I can only assume that there was something going on. I know that this could be a muddled memory and have generally ruled it out as one, but I have had many ghost experiences as a child that I hesitate to abandon entirely. Does anyone else have any similar experiences that might be related? If this kind woman is still helping wandering children keep their bellies warm, I would love to leave her a thank you on my next voyage. I'm an actor at a haunted attraction in Pennsylvania. I was playing Jason on the hayride scene tonight. I hop up on the hayride and walk up and down the middle of it and scare people. This is my 2nd year doing it, and I absolutely love this gig. But tonight, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was the second to last wagon of the evening. I was in the middle of the wagon, headed toward the front, when I got a really bad gut feeling that something was off. I got chills immediately and tried to hide the feeling of terror I had at that moment from customers. I turned my head, and to my left I saw a girl staring at me. She looked completely normal at first, until she blinked. In what seemed like hours, I saw her blink in slow motion, her eyes going from the sides and meeting at the middle. After the first blink, I saw her eyes turn completely black. She cracked a small smile while staring at me straight through my mask and into my soul. I heard her laugh inside my head. I was frozen for a moment, and she blinked again and she looked normal. My body unfroze, and I tried my best to finish the wagon. This was literally the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. What did I see? Last night I was laying in bed trying to sleep. My room is already a nice, cool temperature due to my air conditioner. However, it feels as though out of nowhere the temperature drops 10 more degrees. I find this a bit strange, but I don't really mind it. Then suddenly, I feel what I think is a touch, like something is touching me around my neck and chest, as well as pressure building on those areas. I simply try not to ignore it and go to sleep. The cold and sensations of touch are a mere annoyance at this point, but that's when I saw it. I looked over my bed to the door, and there it was. A large, lanky shadow figure standing there with yellow eyes. It was only there for a second, but it still managed to scare me. Luckily, I was able to sleep, and as a precaution, I now have a bowl of salt in my room, as I hear it repels evil spirits and possibly demons.